My wife, Barbie, with whom I grew up in India, she was in another missionary family, has just had her annual 10-day visit to her father, who's now 96 years of age, living in the U.S. and nearing the end of his life. In fact, we thought it might end last night. It's that close. And when the writer of Ecclesiastes comes to mind, Dad is one of the ones to whom my imagination travels. A frail, grandfatherly sage. Or from my India roots, a guru. Or from my New Zealand roots, the Maori elder or kaumatua. And in these verses, it's as if the grandchildren are gathered around and he is desperate for them to learn from the things that he has seen in the world. Now, these are easy to locate in the text. You just need to look for the phrase, I saw, which comes in 3:16, 4:1, 4:4, and 4:7. So keep your devices or your Bibles open, and you can follow along. And tonight, as long as it doesn't crash your imagination, we're going to imagine that this frail, grandfatherly sage has his own Instagram feed, as he posts 4 photos, one after the other, with each one coming to us complete with hashtags and captions and comments for his followers. So the first photo comes in 3:16 to 22, and it carries the hashtags right at the beginning in verse 16, hashtag under the sun, and towards the end in verse 19, hashtag vanity. These are 2 of this sage's favorite expressions. Under the sun, used only by him in the Bible. And it speaks of what life becomes like when it is disconnected from the one who is beyond the sun, from God. While vanity is the melancholic chorus of this book. The Message uses the word smoke, and the message is right. It is, with vanity, the image of smoke rising from a village fire or breath breathed out on a cold, frosty morning. Both visible for a while, but so brief and so weightless that they disappear into nothingness. Okay, so what is it in this photo that carries these hashtags? Well, verse 16, I saw under the sun that in the place of justice, even there was wickedness. And in the place of righteousness, even there was wickedness. In the very place where there should be justice, in the very place where there should be righteousness, there is actually wickedness and corruption, probably referring to the law courts. So he sees the corruption by the wicked for whom there is no justice. And it is the delay in that justice that impacts him so much. Verse 17 states that there is a time for judgment, just like there's a time for other things earlier in the chapter. But then in verses 18 and 19, he slips back into the cynicism that comes when justice is delayed for too long. Death comes to the corrupt before judgment can happen to them. When there is this delay, he says, there is no great difference between animals and humans. They both die, and after that there is nothing. Verse 20, all go to one place, all are from the dust, and to dust all return. It's a bit like the psalmist crying out with his questions. Why do the evil prosper? How long, O Lord? Why the delay in your justice? Now, I travel a lot in my work with Langham, Asia, Africa, Latin America. And wherever I go, I like to get people talking about their context. Where is it hard for Christians where you live? And they speak with such conviction and such passion about the uniqueness of the number one problem that they face. No one else could be like us. And I have to try and look shocked and be filled with empathy, because everyone else is just like them. And just like this grandfatherly sage's Instagram feed. Corruption. Corruption. The corruption by the wicked, for whom there is no justice. In that conversation, more often than not, that word will come up within 60 seconds. Everywhere. And you start speaking about the possibility of justice coming. Every single time they tend to laugh. Such a prospect is a joke. The delay will be so long it won't ever happen. And it is a cause of humor. An organization called Transparency International creates an annual corruption perception index. It ranks the most corrupt countries in the world, starting with the one perceived to be the least corrupt, and then progressing on to the most. Every year, 180 countries. New Zealand has been ranked number 1 for some years, the least corrupt country in the world, perceived. In 2017, Australia came in at number 13 of 180. Now, those rankings make me worry about the church in Australia and New Zealand, because we have this obsession with being relevant in our world. It can be the most highest priority for the church. We got to be relevant. It's almost an obsession. But if we experience such little corruption, and if we make no effort to understand the way it breeds hopelessness and helplessness that leads to this odd kind of humor, then we live in an irrelevant little bubble on the margins, far, far from most of the world, where we find the corruption by the wicked, for whom there is no justice. Hashtag under the sun. Hashtag vanity. And then each time under the photo next to the hashtags is the grandfatherly sage's caption for his followers, "Hear his grandchildren." It's easy to find these comments each time. You just need to look for the words better. And here it comes in verse 22. "So I saw that there is nothing better, that a man should rejoice in his work, for that is his lot." Yes, as this photo hits me and I process it, it's so bad, he says, that the only way to live is to shut out the past and the future and simply live for the present and enjoy it. What about the second photo posted to his Instagram feed? It comes in verses 1 to 3 of chapter 4, and it carries a single hashtag, but it appears twice. At the beginning of these verses and at the end. And once again, it is hashtag under the sun. And so once again, we expect a photo of what life looks like when God is shut out and ignored. And here are some of the saddest verses in the Bible. "Again, I saw all the oppression that are done under the sun. And behold, the tears of the oppressed, and they had no one to comfort them. On the side of their oppressors there was power, and there was no one to comfort them. I saw the tears. He sees the oppression of the powerless, for whom there is no comforter. As an observer, those tears did not harden him. He did not make excuses for the oppression. He did not rationalize it away. Twice in one verse, this distressing, haunting echo. There is no one to comfort them. The repetition in the text is there for impact, the horror of it all, the relentlessness of it all. An Indian friend of mine tells short stories through video. And in his little video, which he calls The Voiceless, he follows a fake 50 rupee note, about $1, as it travels among the poor street vendors and the metro students, among the poor laborers and the property developers, among the waiters and the corporates in the restaurants. And the point he makes is that the fake note always ends up in the hands of the poor and the powerless and the oppressed. They will be the ones who can't dump it on someone else. And the film finishes with a laborer ripping up the note and returning to his family in tears, unable to buy them a simple evening meal of biryani. I saw the tears, the oppression of the powerless, for whom there is no comforter. Hashtag under the sun. And next to the hashtag comes the caption for his followers or grandchildren. Remember, just the word better, and it will be nearby. So bad, so horrid is the oppression that he sees, that he concludes that it is better to be dead or to stay unborn. That's how bad it is. Reminds us of Job. Why was I not hidden in the ground like a stillborn child? Reminds us of Jeremiah. Why was I ever born? My entire life has been filled with trouble, sorrow, and shame. With those who are oppressed and have no comforter, the grandpa is saying, I can understand their suicidal longings. It is that bad. In fact, it is so bad. It is better to stay in the womb and stay unborn and not come into this dreadful world. The third photo posted to his Instagram feed comes in verses 4, 5, and 6. Again, a single hashtag, but repeated twice at the beginning in verse 4 and at the end in verse 6. You see it? Hashtag striving after wind. Another favorite phrase of the grandfatherly sage. It speaks of futility, like chasing a parking ticket on a windy day. What is the point? And so we ask again, what is the activity in this photo? Verse 4, I saw that all toil and all skill in work come from a man's envy of his neighbor. Toil, achievement, striving, and the envy of the other, which provokes this rivalry. Work has already been a theme in this book in chapter 1 and 2, especially the frustration of working hard without being able to enjoy success. And this time, it's the motivation behind working which is being addressed. And he sees an envy in the human heart, a jealousy, the rivalry amongst the envious, for whom there is no rest. It is very perceptive to realize just how much envy, just how much rivalry is the motivation for people trying to get ahead in life. and just how much this spurs the competition. The book of Proverbs. The heart at peace gives life to the body, but envy rots the bones. And if we're honest with ourselves, it's in our families, it's in our classrooms and workplaces, it's in our businesses and politics, it's between our nations, it's on the fields and tracks and courts and pools of those Commonwealth Games venues. The rivalry is in our hearts. It's pretty much the engine that drives our society. And also history. Last year I read a book called The Silk Roads. Yes, plural, not singular. Because the thesis is that these roads that crisscross what the author calls the spine of Asia, these countries from Syria and Iraq through Iran up to the Stans and into China, they are the center of the world. They are what he calls the true Mediterranean. Even when European powers, the setting for so much of the history that we have learned, even when European powers are rivals with each other, it is sourced in their envy of the other one having a greater share of the resources along the Silk Roads of Asia. It cannot be escaped. From the family circle and the classroom to the great sweep of history, rivalry is felt. We human beings are covetous machines. The rivalry amongst the envious, for whom there is no rest. Hashtag striving after the wind. And the thing about this rivalry is that it creates winners and losers, leading to the oppression that we saw in the photo that we just left. It is the rivalry of 4, 5, and 6 that often lies behind the oppression of 1, 2, and 3. And next to the hashtag comes the caption, and it's all about watching our hands, he says. Will it be 2 handfuls with toil in verse 6, as we've been discussing, or will it be no hands, folded hands, an Old Testament phrase that is used to describe the lazy fool? No, he says, neither both hands or folded hands is the better way. What does he say? I love the NIV. Far better to have 1 handful with tranquility. Give your work 1 hand and keep 1 hand for rest and quiet. The 4th photo comes in verses 7 to 12. And the hashtag, no surprises here, near the beginning in verse 7, at the end of verse 8, hashtag vanity and hashtag under the sun. And how is the activity described this time? In verse 8, 1 person who has no other, either son or brother, yet there is no end to all his toil, and his eyes are never satisfied with riches. A man all alone, no spouse, no son, no sibling. A man with no end to his toil, working hard. A man whose eyes are never content with his wealth. A man with no enjoyment in life. He sees the loneliness of the successful for whom there is no friendship. Loneliness is awful. Have you ever struggled with loneliness? The ache in the heart, the knot in the stomach. The British government has just recently appointed a minister of loneliness in order to try and tackle the social and health issues caused by social isolation. In Delhi, in India, where we were based in my teenage years, upwards of 10 bodies a day arrive in its morgues. And these 10 bodies remain unidentified and unclaimed because they belong to no one. 10 a day. But it's a particular loneliness that is on our grandfather Sage's mind. It's the loneliness of those who work so hard to climb the ladder of success, only to find at the top there is room for only one person. This is the loneliness on his mind, the loneliness of the successful for whom there is no friendship. #vanity. #under the sun. And next to the hashtags is our frail grandfatherly sage's caption for his followers. Quite a few this time in verses 9 to 12, and each draws on the life of a traveler in Israel at the time, and each one is sparked by that opening phrase, two are better than one. Verse 10, a friend is wonderful when you fall. They are there to help you up, a help in times of need. Verse 11, for those travelers, hot days were followed by very cold nights, a warmth in times of cold. Verse 12, when under attack by anything that threatens, a friend is a protection in times of danger. This is true friendship, the better way, he is saying. And it goes all the way back to Genesis 2. It is not good for man to be alone. But he wasn't alone. God was there with him. But God alone is not enough, seems to be what God is suggesting. We are made to love others and to be loved by others. We are made for friendship and companionship. One scholar writes of this Instagram feed from our frail grandfatherly sage in this way. His analysis is so contemporary that it is easier to apply it today than to grasp its ancient significance. It's true, isn't it? His Instagram feed could be our feed. It's the same anguish we see today. It's the same horror show. These images speak to us of a world that is in a mess and needs to be fixed. These images speak of a world that is lost and needs to be found. In a previous life, I used to be asked to speak a bit at the induction and ordination services of new pastors. And on one occasion, the church rang me on the phone. Do you have a Bible passage for Sunday's service? Yes, I do. Ecclesiastes chapter 4. Thank you. Next day, I get an email from the pastor. You mean Ephesians chapter 4, don't you? No, I mean Ecclesiastes chapter 4. He was a bit worried. You see, participating with God in his mission in the world today is about seeing the pain in these photos in our own world and addressing that pain with the truth and the grace of the gospel. And we are able to do so because we see something else in these photos. We can do a little photo shopping. Actually, not something else that we see, someone else that we see. Because with the corruption by the wicked for whom there is no justice, Jesus is there, the judge. Justice may be delayed, but it is never forgotten. With the oppression of the powerless for whom there is no comforter, Jesus is there, the comforter on the side of the oppressed and the powerless. With the rivalry amongst the envious for whom there is no rest, Jesus is there as the rest, longing for people to come to him because his yoke is easy and his burden is light. Here, find rest for your souls. And with the loneliness of the successful for whom there is no friendship, Jesus is there, the friend. On the night before he died, he spoke to his disciples and called them his friends. But the Jesus photoshopped into each photo is not just standing there. He is waving at us, calling to us, inviting us into the photo, each one of them, calling us to live for him in this world, and calling us to work with him to bring justice, comfort, rest, and friendship. May it be so.